Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. We've got a highly volatile, incredibly fast-moving geopolitical situation to unpack today. We're drawing directly from a recent, really detailed broadcast by Sky News Australia, and we're going to neutrally and objectively break down these massive U.S. military strikes on Iran. First, we're going to map out exactly what happened on the ground, the hard facts, and then we'll dive deep into the complex strategic and political analysis that the source presented. There is a lot to cover, so let's jump right in.
Okay. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with 1, the breaking news. Then 2, breaking the ceasefire. 3, analyzing the Iranian regime. And finally 4, the strategy behind the strikes.
All right, kicking things off with Section 1, the breaking news regarding U.S. Central Command's strikes.
So, what exactly triggered this entire discussion and sent absolute shockwaves through the international community? Well, it all started with some sudden, intense kinetic action from the U.S. Central Command. And to really grasp the gravity of the situation, you just have to look at the sheer scale of the operation. 80. According to the initial reports from the broadcast, the United States military ruthlessly wiped over 80 targets completely off the map in a series of highly coordinated offensive strikes against Iran. I mean, we are not talking about a warning shot across the bow here. This was a massive, sweeping operation.
Now, what's really interesting is exactly what the U.S. targeted. They didn't just hit random infrastructure. According to the reports, they systematically dismantled absolutely crucial strategic assets. We're talking about taking out Iranian air defense systems, which severely crippled their ability to protect their own airspace. They hit command and control networks, effectively blinding their operational logistics. They destroyed anti-ship missile capabilities and wiped out more than 60 Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps boats. They literally dismantled the exact assets required to wage war in that specific theater.
Moving right along to Section 2, breaking the ceasefire and understanding the catalyst.
You know, a strike of that magnitude doesn't just happen in a vacuum. To understand why the U.S. responded so severely, we have to look at the specific catalyst that shattered what was already a deeply fragile diplomatic agreement. And it all comes down to the number 3. Right as U.S. Central Command announced their strikes, they revealed the provocation. Iran had recently attacked exactly 3 commercial vessels. And keep in mind, these weren't military warships. These were commercial ships crewed by totally innocent civilians, just transiting through the international waterway of the Strait of Hormuz.
The official justification from the U.S. military was incredibly swift and absolutely unequivocal. CENTCOM put it this way: the unwanted aggression by Iranian forces is a clear and dangerous violation of the ceasefire and undermines freedom of navigation. The source really highlights how the U.S. felt completely compelled to impose heavy costs on Iran for directly threatening innocent civilian lives and vital international trade routes. Iran was basically given one primary job during this diplomatic pause: just keep the Strait of Hormuz safe, and they failed.
That brings us to Section 3, analyzing the Iranian regime.
So, with the ceasefire effectively up in smoke, the Sky News Australia broadcast shifts into some deep geopolitical commentary. To understand the why behind this whole conflict, the broadcast leans heavily on the analysis of foreign policy expert Lisa Dattari to unpack the very nature of the Iranian government. A massive focal point of her analysis is the IRGC. For a Western audience to really grasp the situation, Dattari notes that the Iranian regime has actually become even more hardline over the last 5 decades. The IRGC, which is defined here as a deadly paramilitary force, has moved directly into the central core of the Iranian government.
And the analyst makes this fascinating, crucial distinction here. She argues that we literally cannot look at Iran like a traditional military state. It's not like Egypt or Pakistan, where a military simply supports a government. Instead, she characterizes Iran as, quote, a deadly ideology that is wrapped around a militia terrorist state. According to the source, this makes Iran an entirely different and far more dangerous beast on the world stage.
And this brilliantly illustrates what Dattari describes as just staggering hypocrisy. She notes that while the regime rules with an absolute iron fist, constantly pushing this strict, pious, death to America ideology onto their own citizens, the reality behind closed doors is, well, it's quite different. The children and grandchildren of these very leaders are reportedly living in Europe and the United States, wearing skimpy bikinis and spending millions of dollars on luxury Western yachts. The analyst argues they don't actually live by this pious ideology at all. They simply use it as a deadly tool to maintain their grip on power.
Which naturally leads the broadcaster to ask this fundamental, structural question: can a regime like this actually be negotiated with? If you're dealing with a leadership that views itself at the absolute forefront of the apocalypse,
one that prioritizes a radical afterlife vision over real-world diplomacy. Is a gentleman's handshake or a standard treaty even possible?
Well, according to the analysis presented in the source, the answer is a resounding no. Daftari's foregone conclusion is starkly laid out right here. There is no negotiation. There is no compromise. There is no reformist to be found. The broadcast argues that the regime is simply showing the West exactly who they are, a rogue state that just cannot be trusted to uphold a ceasefire. Meaning, diplomatic off-ramps? They're essentially an illusion.
Which takes us to our final section, Section 4, the strategy behind strikes.
So, if standard diplomacy is totally off the table, what is the actual plan? For decades, the broadcast notes, U.S. leaders across entirely different administrations have faced what it describes as two incredibly myopic choices regarding Iran's rogue behavior. Option A was a massive, full-scale bombing campaign against Iran. Option B was to essentially sit back, do nothing, and let Iran develop a nuclear bomb. The problem is, neither option actually solved the core issue, the existence of the regime itself.
To avoid those two extremes, the broadcast outlines the stated strategy of Donald Trump, dating back to the early hours of this broader conflict. The strategy involved three very clear steps. Step 1, severely degrade and diminish the regime's operational capacity, which is exactly like wiping out those 80 targets we talked about earlier. Step 2, push the regime to the absolute brink of collapse. And Step 3, pass the baton back to the Iranian people so they can finally determine their own future.
So the crucial point is, if that was the strategy, why was there a ceasefire in the first place? Did the U.S. just get played? The analyst argues no, they were likely just buying time. The broadcast theorizes that the U.S. engaged in this diplomatic hiatus to manage some really intense domestic pressures. They needed the U.S. midterm elections to pass without the shadow of an escalating war hanging over them. They needed extraordinarily high gas prices to settle down while American families went on summer vacations. And, they needed to manage international optics during massive global events like the World Cup.
But here's the absolutely crucial takeaway. The U.S. never actually walked away. The broadcast emphasizes that despite the pause, the overarching lever remained firmly in place. The U.S. military kept its finger right on the trigger, fully prepared to return to kinetic military warfare at a moment's notice. The administration gave Iran a chance to de-escalate. Iran refused, shot at civilian ships, and so the warfare immediately resumed.
And this brings us to a really compelling final thought to leave you with. When we look at this entire strategic dynamic, a hardline regime ruling by ideology on one side and a superpower managing domestic clocks while keeping its finger on the military trigger on the other, we have to ask ourselves, was this recent ceasefire ever actually a genuine step toward lasting peace? Or, in this incredibly volatile region, are these agreements just highly calculated, temporary pauses before the inevitable return to war? It's a question that really redefines how we watch this conflict unfold. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning what you see.